we've seen that mega poll that came out yesterday, that MRP poll, which brings all the polls together, and it's showing that the Tories could be left with something like 66 seats. The polls aren't shifting at the moment, and they need something to change quickly because we're now 5 weeks until polling day. And if something doesn't change, then what next? Are we going to end up with a Conservative Party that literally could not, it may not be the opposition?
Joining me now is Theo Usherwood, political commentator. Theo, how's it gone for the first, 9-10 days that we've had? Who's come out on top, do you think?
Well, I think Labour has come out on top, certainly for the first 6 or 7 days. But I think and I'm not sure to what extent the public's necessarily listening, but the Diane Abbott row has perhaps thrown things a little bit off course. And this is, in the main, it's an internal row within the Labour Party. But, of course, the Tories will now be trying to make capital on that by saying that Keir Starmer, and you heard him there, this is a party that's changed and we want to bring change to the country. They're making the argument that he's in hock to Angela Rayner, his deputy leader, who said originally that she thought that Diane Abbott should stand as a Labour MP, and that the argument from the Conservatives is that Labour hasn't really changed because the left of the party is still in charge or still has a significant influence because Keir Starmer hasn't been able to push Diane Abbott out to the sidelines. Now, for the Tories, we've seen that mega poll that came out yesterday, that MRP poll, which brings all the polls together, and it's showing that the Tories could be left with something like 66 seats. The polls aren't shifting at the moment, and they need something to change quickly because we're now 5 weeks until polling day. And if something doesn't change, then what next? Are we going to end up with a Conservative Party that literally could not, it may not be the opposition, it may just be in opposition. Yes. And that's a significant problem, and that's causing concern. Rishi Sunak, you heard in that excerpt you played there from his speech saying the British public don't like being taken for granted and that Labour think they have it all sewn up and done and dusted. But the truth is the polls aren't shifting and the Tories need something to move. They need them to narrow a little bit because we're now entering a stage, we've done the first 10 days or so, but something needs to move. Otherwise, the Tories are heading for a dinosaur level event.
Do you think we're going to see more policies come out from the Conservatives? We've had in the first 9 days already big announcements, they don't want to call it a conscription service, but this whole sort of idea of a national service. We've had it's not called the triple lock plus, I think is the official name, or quadruple lock. Yeah. We've had all this big one. Are we going to keep seeing these big policy announcements to start shifting the polls?
Well, the Tories only have £6 billion to play with, and that's and Labour price matching them on that, and they're going to raise that money through clamping down on tax avoidance and tax evasion. And that with their announcements, they've already used up more than half of that amount of money. So there's not a huge amount to play with. At the moment, you mentioned both of those policies, of course, the triple lock plus and, of course, national service. The Tories are in defensive mode. They're trying to shore up their blue wall. They're trying to shore up their core vote so there isn't a disaster. And that's why you've seen, I think, particularly the Lib Dems, Ed Davey do increasingly quite spurious, like going down a water slide, falling off a paddleboard and riding a bike down a hill with his legs wide apart because they're desperate for attention. The Lib Dems are the ones who are facing the squeeze here. What I do think is interesting, though, is the announcement on the economy today. You've got it on page 2 of your Times with this extra £600 million for towns across the country. And this was something that was identified by Labour and Lisa Nandy, particularly after the last general election, as I remember, was you have these small towns, particularly across the red wall seats, which felt neglected by Labour. And that's why you see that both leaders at non-league football clubs often doing press calls there. And this is where the Tories are trying, actually, I think what's interesting about this announcement is it is going a little bit towards, shifting a bit towards their red wall vote. For instance, Lee Rowley's seat in North East Derbyshire, that's going to be getting some money out of this £600 million fund for 30 towns across the UK. And there's a little bit of venturing into that red wall territory with this. And of course, you'll remember Boris Johnson was accused of threatening MPs when he was in particularly difficult votes by saying, with the original money that was given to town, the Levelling Up Fund for towns across the country, you're not going to get any of this money if you don't vote with this particular legislation. He used it as a stick with which to ensure that any red wall MPs who were going to fall out of line stayed in line.
Some of the criticism that has been levelled at the Labour Party, aside from the events surrounding Diane Abbott, is that we haven't heard anything new from the Labour Party. Everything that they've announced so far are things that they've already been talking about. Are we going to see anything new from the Labour Party?
Well, it's turning into a bit of a bore-off, isn't it, with this election? I don't mean that too flippantly, but there isn't a huge amount of money. There isn't a huge amount of money available because we've had the pandemic. Obviously, we're in a post-2008 world, and there isn't a huge amount of money into the Treasury. Just doesn't exist. So Keir Starmer doesn't want to be accused of being financially irresponsible or not being prudent with the country's money. That's why when he originally had that £28 billion a year that he wanted to borrow in order to invest in the green economy and green infrastructure, him and Rachel Reeves both rode back on that before the election campaign because they could see where that was going in terms of attack lines from the Tories saying that they weren't responsible with the public finances. So for Keir Starmer, it is about just and we've had this with the energy company GB Energy. That was an announcement from last September. And he doesn't have, because he doesn't have the huge amount of money to spend. It's sort of regurgitating previous policies, but the main thing from Keir Starmer and Labour's point of view that they're trying to get across is that the party has changed. They're trying to ensure that people who are wavering in their vote, people who voted Conservative last time, feel that they can trust the Labour Party. And that's why it was a misstep with Diane Abbott, because they should have dealt with this a while ago. It was sewn up a while ago. The investigation, she'd apologise to start off with. So if there's an apology, there's an admission of guilt, right, from Diane Abbott, that she messed up with that letter to the Observer when she made those original claims. So it could have been dealt with much earlier rather than trying to get into this situation that they find themselves in now.
Looking forward to this week, of course, everyone's got their battle buses out, so they're going to be travelling up and down the country. But the big event coming on Tuesday is the leaders' debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer on ITV. Do you think it's going to tell us something we don't know? Do you think, it feels like Rishi Sunak has got the better deal in the sense that that's what the Conservatives were angling for all along. Yeah. They didn't particularly fancy a debate where they'd have someone from the Reform Party, for example, on the same platform, or, Liberal Democrats, having to actually fend off a lot of opponents rather than actually being able to focus on one opponent, which is Keir Starmer. What do you expect from Tuesday night?
I think firstly, you're right to talk about that, and I think firstly, it's helpful from the point of view of voters because it's only going to be one of these two men who's Prime Minister on July the 5th. It's quite simple, and I think the public will find it much easier to understand rather than having too many voices and too many attacks against Rishi Sunak or indeed Keir Starmer from the other parties. So I think head-to-head debates tend to work better than when you have multiple voices and everybody chipping in and working in different alliances to try and undermine their opponents. I think it's a much cleaner way of doing it. And I think it's what I found quite surprising, and I think this is quite instructive about the situation we find ourselves in. And I've worked on trying to secure leaders' debates on when I was in a previous life when I was political editor at LBC. It is incredibly difficult to do. It's like doing a Rubik's cube because you do one side and then you can't do the other side, and you're trying to. What you do is the strategy from a broadcaster's point of view is you go to the people who you know will want to take part. Right, and then you work your way up and you say, well, such and such is taking part. We need you to take part, and they will only ever do it. The main principle in this case, the Prime Minister will only ever do it if it's in his interests to do so, or her interests to do so. And of course, the problem comes when it's not, and then you have all these other parties who want to do it, but actually, until you get the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, nothing works. It just you're left empty-handed, and so you often end up promising more to one person, and this is the danger. You end up promising, guaranteeing something to one person, and the BBC ended up with this with Andrew Neil when he did over Jeremy Corbyn, and then but they'd promised Jeremy Corbyn, yes, we're going to have the Prime Minister, and then Boris Johnson went and reneged on that, and then Boris Johnson said, well, actually, I didn't agree to it. It's so tricky to nail down. And I think what makes it much easier in this situation is the Tories are so far behind that actually Rishi Sunak wants to do it. He has to do it. He has to take that chance. And that's why I wasn't surprised to hear this announcement come early doors to say actually there are going to be these debates, because in usual circumstances it's just not the case.
Important to say that ITV have said that we'll also have another debate on the 11th of June, which will feature all the parties, the Conservatives, Labour, Reform, the Greens, the Liberal Democrats and Plaid Cymru. But they have specified it will either be leaders or senior members.
Exactly.
So that's where it's unlikely that we will see, perhaps we'll see Angela Rayner and, I don't know, Oliver Dowden from the Conservatives.
Precisely. I think but that's exactly the point, is you as a Conservative, you can say, well, is it James Cleverly, you can go up and you can do this, or Lord Cameron, you could go and do this, but you don't necessarily have the debate with the leaders with the main principles.
Okay. Thea, as ever, great to get your thoughts on this. Thank you so much for joining us.